Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Gabbie. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Mr. Richard Whitehead. Did you receive that short pass all well and good?
I did, I think, yeah, and I'm now legging it towards the opposition goal with it. Is that what you wanted?
That's absolutely fantastic. And
I might get my sights. I might actually, sure.
Well, in the modern age, lots of teams don't have shots. Certainly in the first half. Sometimes they do in the second. But back in the day of the 70s, everybody had shots. They were going in from left, right, and centre. It was a different ball game. The FA Cup was a different ball game there. And welcome all to Book Corner Extra Time with Richard Whitehead, who's written this wonderful book, The Cup, a pictorial celebration of the world's greatest football tournament, which is 150 years young this year.
You don't want me to sing happy birthday, do you, Gabbie?
No, and neither am I. But we are going to go through the book. First and foremostly, okay, 150 years. I'm guessing that's the why. But why the Cup and not the FA Cup? There's lots of books about regarding the FA Cup. But this is different. This is a pictorial book with lots of wonderful writings and stories. So, guys, it's not just pictures. It's stories as well as pictures.
I'm glad you said that, Gabbie, because since it's been published and since I've seen it, and someone said to me last week, a well-known chap in Birmingham said to me last week, Rob Bishop, who used to be programme editor for Legend,
top man.
He said to me last week, you shouldn't have had pictorial in it because it gives the impression that it's just pictures when pictures are fantastic, obviously, and a lot of work went into choosing them. But it's sort of 50, as you've seen, Gabbie, it's 50-50 words as well. So I thought about what Rob said and I thought, yeah, that's actually, he's got a fair shout there. However, it's printed and published now, so we won't quibble about that. But I'm glad you said that it is not just lovely pictures, although, God, they are lovely.
Absolutely fantastic. How long did it take you to get all the pictures in place? Because there are an awful lot of pictures. There's an awful lot of words. There's just under 300, just over 250 pages. It is a coffee table book. It's a book that you can pick up, dip into and dip out of. It isn't in any chronological order. It's just full of fantastic bits and looking at the magic of the FA Cup. Now, lots of cups didn't have lids, but the FA Cup was given a lid to keep the magic in it, and you've just let that lid off and the magic has come out onto your pages.
Wow, you're a poet.
I actually am a poet, to be fair. I've written many a poem. Yeah.
If only I could have thought of that. That's absolutely brilliant. Gabbie. Well, I didn't answer your previous question about why the cup. I suppose why the cup, because that's just what we call it, isn't it? It's the cup. I remember a thing I wanted to put in the introduction, but it didn't quite work. Walking down Trinity Road on a January night in 1976, Villa v Southampton, third round replay, and Southampton were in the second division, and we'd just, I'm a Villa fan, people will have put that out now. We'd nearly won the game at the Dell on the Saturday, and they'd equalised in the last minute. They were in the second division. Okay, we were only just in our first season back in the first division, but it seemed to my 14-year-old self, whatever it was, 15-year-old self, that this was a bit of a foregone conclusion. So I remember saying to my dad, expressing surprise at the length of the queues going back to get into the Holt end. And he said, well, it's the cup, and since then, the cup has been how I've always thought of it. So I didn't really have to, thinking about a title wasn't really an issue. And as people won't know this possibly, but you have to be careful with the FA's licensing, what you put on the cover. So we could not have had a picture of the FA Cup on the cover. We're fine to have pictures of people with the FA Cup on the cover, and there are two, as you've seen, Gabbie. But you can't. That's a copyrighted image. So So, we had to be a bit clever to get around that as well.
1976, Southampton, third round replay.
Yeah.
They did pretty well that season, didn't they, in the
Oh,
FA Cup, Southampton,
yeah, they
having
did.
knocked out the Villa.
Well, one of my dad's mantras was the team that knocks the Villa out always wins the cup. Now, that must have dated back a very, very long time. Hasn't been true for a while now, but that used to be said, and I've read it in old papers as well. So my dad didn't just make it up himself. But we didn't think when second division Southampton scrambled all the time January that we'd just seen the winners. And lovely circular way of bringing it back to your question, isn't it? But that's the magic of the cup. Second division Southampton scramble a last minute equaliser in the third round against the Villa and end up winning at Wembley a few months later. And I don't know if you've read the story of Bobby Stokes in the book, have you,
I
Gabbie? Yeah.
haven't read the story about Bobby Stokes, but
Bobby Stokes,
I
who
did.
got the winner that day, was just, that is one of the great stories in the book. Really, won't spoil it for everybody, but what a tragic figure, what a tragic hero.
I did a podcast with Jimmy Mack, who put the ball on for Bobby Stokes. He also did to Mick Shannon in the first half, and Jimmy Mack says they were both equally as good as each other. The fact that lad Shannon won a great finisher. He didn't end up in the back of the net. But Bobby obviously was, and it did. And playing against his former employees, Manchester United, as well. And you're right. I do podcasts with two of the boys, regular podcasts. Terry Curran played in the 1984 FA Cup final for Everton when they beat Southampton. Again, Southampton. And my other podcast partner is Alan Hudson, who played in the 1970 FA Cup semi-final against Watford when Chelsea won 5-1, and also Arsenal when they knocked out Orient 3-0 at the Bridge in 1978. And both of them boys say to me, do you know what, Gab? When your name's on the cup, your name is on the cup. And you look at so many winners that they've had their little bit of luck along the way. In fact, one of Terry's first FA Cup games was against Liverpool, and Kitch had a shot that just, I think, hit it either the top of the net or the bar and just went over. It beat Clem, and had that gone in, Liverpool would have been on the way out. They won the FA Cup in that year, of course, and that is the magic and the beauty of the cup.
Yes, it is. It's so, those, as you say, I think all winners, or certainly back in the day, all winners have that moment. Well, and even last night, wasn't the Forest? People thought Forest maybe should have had a penalty, all winners along the way. You've got to have that moment where you might be on the verge of going out, I suppose. Yes, exactly.
Absolutely. I'm looking at page 186. 1948, the stately home of football. Frederick Rinder drew up plans to increase Villa Park's capacity to 100,000. I looked at, wow. And then I looked at, in his history of Villa Park, Simon English called Rinder an architectural alligator. When peace returned, he was soon planning his next scheme. There was plans to have Villa Park as 100,000 capacity. I didn't realise that, and I've actually gone and bought the book 100 Years of Villa by Simon. Fantastic. I'm not a Villa fan. I'm a Birmingham City fan, but I'm a fan of Aston Villa. And I know people are going to be very, very confused. But when I look at Villa and I look at the history, and there's so much of Villa in this book, so I think it's only right to start on that page. And you look at the old ground, it is a fabulous ground and hosted many FA Cup semi-finals to boot.
Can you imagine the queues at the train station if the capacity was 110,000?
I've been in those queues of 41,000, and trust me, no, I can't. It would literally be going back to Spaghetti Junction, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would really. I don't know if there was that a possibility, but Rinder was a visionary figure, and very much along with George Ramsay, the men who built the Villa really made it great. And so, yes, it was. I guess the people listening to this are mainly going to be people who like a bit of history and like a bit of nostalgia. So
Yeah.
I'm guessing they'll be like me and you and think the semi-final should still be at Villa Park and other places like that, and not at Wembley. And it was noticeable in the coverage over the weekend that it's now become normal for people to say when clubs win the quarter final and they're through to Wembley.
Yeah.
It's just saying, which is true, of course,
It's
but
wrong.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. So, Villa Park, semi-finals at Villa Park. Obviously, I didn't actually go to one as a Villa fan, but it did seem a right and proper place, as did other venues. And and now the club grounds are so good, aren't they? That generally speaking, who would mind a semi-final at the Etihad Stadium, for instance, or the Emirates, or or Tottenham's stadium? So semi-finals are at Wembley are another thing that's helped that the FA have done that hasn't helped the competition, in my view.
Absolutely. I think it takes away from the day. Because when we
Yes.
were kids back in the 70s, we're looking at the BBC or ITV because they both
Mm.
broadcast the final. It was the bumper cans come out. There was, I don't know how many pints were in there, but your dad and your uncles and everybody would congregate round a house. The FA Cup final was the greatest game in the football calendar because it was one of the only ones that was live. We didn't have live football, and I think these days it's taken that magic a little bit is taken away by not having it as such a special day at Wembley, because I think every boy, when we played football, we'd literally get that Wembley trophy out and we'd play Wembley, and it was about the road to Wembley and getting to Wembley. And that road to Wembley started for the bigger clubs in the third round. For the smaller clubs, it started way back when. And to get to the semi final was almost as big a day as the final because
Mm.
it was you're 90 minutes away from Wembley. I think they've taken that away now, and I don't think it's the same. Take
No,
it back to the grounds and have Wembley as just the venue of the final.
I mean you're right, of course, about it was one of the few games on live games. It was a fantastic day. I mean, I said to someone last week, Gabbie, my mum was not a football fan at all, and a regular Saturday afternoon was to go shopping, in Tamworth, which is where I
Yeah,
grew up. But she didn't go on cup final afternoon.
yeah.
We all sat and watched the cup final, and as I say, she wasn't particularly interested in football, and she didn't sit there watch all the build up, and neither did my dad. But as I did. But
I know.
there was something. It was the biggest sporting event of the year, cup final day, and okay, I know the Grand National, the boat race, Lord's Test match, all those other Wimbledon, of course, all those other things are massive events, but the cup final was really, really special.
Oh, absolutely. And what also is special about the cup final, lovely little story in the book. So, guys, buy the book. Where's the best place that you can buy the book before I get into this next little
Well,
piece?
I think at the moment, funnily enough, I've just been talking to the publishers about this very thing. I think at the moment, if you have no objection to using Amazon, then that's absolutely the best place.
That's how I got it. Yeah.
It's a good price, and it's a very good price actually, and you'll get it whenever, straight away. Supply to the shops takes a bit longer, so I know you don't get to browse in it, but if you look on Amazon, you can see some of the pages, and you get a feel for the thing as you did, Gabbie, I'm sure. But so that's the best place for now. I'm sure it'll start to appear in shops, but it's only in a few shops at the moment, I think.
You don't need to browse because it's an absolute winner. It's a page turner. Every page there's a gem, and the gem that I want to start with is Abide With Me because that is the
Uh,
FA Cup final anthem. And what a lovely story. I didn't realise the story. So
well,
briefly tell us
that
what
was
that was about.
that was new to me.
Yeah.
A clergyman, the words were written by a clergyman in Brixham in Devon, and he was dying, and he knew he was dying, and I think he wanted those words. He summoned up those words, to put into to give vent to how he thought about dying,
Yeah.
really. And it wasn't for a few years. And sorry, Gabbie, I don't have it in front of me, but it wasn't for a few years until those words were matched to the tune that we're familiar with. That came a bit later. And then it first appeared at the Cup final in 1927, the famous year that Cardiff won the Cup and took it out of England for the only time, which is also in the book. And so Abide With Me became part of the sacred rituals of Cup final day, but it dates back a very long way, and it's this clergyman in the lovely Devon fishing port of Brixham could not possibly have imagined that his words would be boomed out over Wembley. And they're not actually, as anyone who stood there and sung them would be aware, they're not actually that appropriate to the occasion. And I think in the late 50s, 1959, I think, Stanley Rouse, who was then Secretary of the FA, tried to get it dropped for that very reason.
Right.
Just thought it wasn't really appropriate, and was supported by clergymen who agreed with him. But there was an outcry. Because it had become so much part of the mythology and the fabric of Cup final day. So it came back, and it's still there, isn't it? We tend to get it warbled by a celebrity singer these days, but and it was nearly dropped in the early 70s as well, when crowds became a little more rebellious. And I think when I first started watching the Cup final, I don't know about you, I don't think it was sung with any great enthusiasm then, and there would be a bit of booing for some reason. I think when fans became a bit younger and a bit more rebellious, I can certainly remember in the very early 70s, it being booed a bit, not for any reason other than the fact that I think it was just the it was just felt like an establishment thing, and fans were a bit more opinionated and rebellious then. But it survived that little scare as well, and now it's a great part of the day, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We even had it at the COVID Cup final, didn't we?
Absolutely.
So it's a very. I've only been to 2 Cup finals, the 2 the Villa have played in my lifetime, but 2 FA Cup finals. But it's a very stirring thing when it's sung. You need a big hanky at that moment, I think.
Absolutely. What hasn't stood the test of time, literally, because it got knocked down. But in 1923, it was built, the Twin Towers, and that final was some final. Billy played a great game, didn't he, that day?
Billy, yeah, he did, yeah. They should have what they should do? They should have a white horse at the final this year, shouldn't they, as part of the...
Yeah, it'd be a good shout.
Part of the pre-match ceremonials. That's not my idea, by the way. That's one of your fellow podcasters put that to me last week. I thought that's a splendid idea.
Who put that, by the way? Who said that?
A chap I spoke to last week called Johnny Brick, who runs a podcast called The Football Library.
Lovely. Well done, Johnny. Great shout.
Fine young man, and I thought that was a splendid idea.
Absolutely. Fantastic.
So the building of the Twin Towers, there's a
lovely picture.
A triumph for concrete there.
And wood.
and the stadium was built in just over a year. It was done in very, very quick time, and not far over budget, I think, either. So it was. What do you think about this, Gabbie? I'm not terribly sentimental about the old Wembley.
I'm a football traditionalist, to be fair. I'm a little bit anti-establishment, if I'm absolutely honest.
Right.
But
that's fair.
yeah, but I do respect the establishment. I'm very much in the historical situation where we should have just left Wembley or kept the Twin Towers. I get the arch and that, but for me, the Twin Towers, and being a Birmingham City fan, I've never watched my team in a proper Cup final. Well, I say that, I watched them at Wembley in the League Cup final, which is a proper cup final, obviously. But I'm
Definitely.
talking way back when I was a kid. We soon realised that if we were waiting for Birmingham City to get to an FA Cup final to see Wembley, we're going to be old men. So I used to go to the old schoolboys or when England played an
So did I.
international game, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that when you saw the Twin Towers for the first time, it for me it was just magical. And whether
Right.
that
Yeah.
was because I was a kid and it was Wembley, it's the home of football, it was, sports night, FA Cup, you football, you want to watch it. Whether it was that romantic side of me that I've always had, I sometimes don't like the game at times, and I don't like
Uh,
the way that the historical content is taken out and almost eroded. And but just seeing it and really cherishing that moment, and I don't think I would have felt the same way about the arch.
I agree with that. I mean, cause goodness knows nobody's more romantic about sport than me.
Yeah.
But I do think, if you had to use those toilets in the old Wembley, or
Oh, they
there
were
was
awful.
the last time I saw the Villa there in '96, we had a shockingly bad seat, which we paid a fortune for.
Mm.
Oh, and I just think some things are not. Some we've got. I think it's a fantastic stadium now. Some things are, generally there are bad things with it. Agreed, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't have died on a hill for the old Wembley.
Yeah, I think
Died in a ditch. That's not died.
Absolutely, and I think you're absolutely spot on. In terms of a stadium, the new Wembley is a far greater stadium than the old Wembley was. But I just think that Twin Towers, I would have loved them to somehow recreate the Twin Towers because I just
I think
thought that they
that's
were
very.
special.
I think that's a very common thing, and if there could have even been somewhere on the approach to it, that
Yeah,
might have been something. If not, I'm sure it would have been virtually impossible to make them part of the stadium. But if there could have been somewhere on the approach to it, that would definitely have been a better thing, undoubtedly. Yeah.
absolutely. Jamie Vardy on the front. There's no one taking the FA Cup off him. That's a
No,
fantastic photo. It's mine,
it
and
is.
you ain't having it. And why Sunderland as well? And how
Well,
difficult was it to pick those two images for the front page?
well, I was blessed with this book, and I should no discussion about this book should go without mentioning Duncan Olner, the designer, who has done a fantastic job. And actually, we had obviously you have some debate about about covers because they're very important.
Yeah.
With publisher, with designer, and the Sunderland one is the only picture in the entire book that I didn't select.
Right.
Duncan selected that, and when people see the book, they'll realise why, and it's because you've got a colour modern image of a single person not really filling the top of the page. This is like my graphic design lesson, Gabbie. I hope you're
Yeah,
paying attention.
I am.
And then at the bottom, you need an historic image, black and white, and it's got to fill a bit more space. It's got to fan out.
Yeah.
So if when people see the cover, it's like most of these things with design. It's subliminal, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't actually take that in, but actually that's what he would have been thinking. It's the only picture I didn't select, but I do love it. Rach Carter there in the middle,
And
holding up the. And Jamie, we had a few people in there. We had the designer originally, Duncan, chose a nice one of Oliver Giroud. I think he was kissing the cup, almost the same as the Vardy one. That wasn't quite right. Then we had one of Steven Gerrard in 2006 because I thought, we need something more modern. Then we thought, hang on a minute, that looks like the book come out in 2006, not now. And that conversation just led us to the most recent winners, really, which of course were Leicester City and still are Leicester City. And then the Vardy story is just such a classic cup story.
absolutely.
Played in every round bar the extra preliminary round. So that's how we ended up with Jamie, really. The things like the cover, as anyone who's published a book and all your guests that you have on every week, they'll tell you a similar thing. Covers are discussed long and hard because they're crucial to selling the book. Really, it's got to look attractive to people, hasn't it?
Absolutely, and you're right. It's a very much a boy's own story, isn't it? The Jamie Vardy story. So I think it's a very apt front cover. Fantastic. And in Raish Carter, the only player to win FA Cup winners' medals on both sides of the war.
Very good bit of trivia. Yeah,
Mm,
very good. Sunderland in 37, Derby in 46. Yeah, that's
absolutely.
yeah.
My word, what a partner he had up front for Derby in '46. The
Yes,
great Peter Doherty.
I've written about that. I've
Yeah.
written about that, and yeah, just that must have been tremendous, mustn't it, to see those two in action? Yeah,
Oh, I
yeah.
mean, you would pay good money to watch those two because they were both
Wow.
genius. And Len Shackleton said of Peter Doherty, a genius among geniuses.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow. That's
yeah, yeah,
incredible.
yeah, yeah. What do you think the pitches were like at the baseball ground in those days?
Oh, yeah, they're probably similar to what the pitches were when Uddy and the boys were playing in the 70s. That baseball grounds
That
always.
was one of the worst, wasn't it?
Oh, it was probably the word, but fit for the game of baseball rather than football. And of course, they used to play baseball, hence the name. I love the picture and the inside cover as well. The great Dixie Dean.
Carrying the cup back.
Yeah, Steve Bloomer, Dixie Dean, and Jimmy Greaves, the only three to sit on the top table of over 1,000 goals. Blimey, they never scored that many, but over 300 goals apiece. It does
Yes,
make me laugh when people, the modern day uh, journalists, presenters, talk about joining the 100 club in the Premier League. No, 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 no. These
yeah,
boys were in the 300 club in the
yeah. They've got
Football
a bit of a
League.
way to go. They've got a bit of a way to go. Yeah, yeah. That's
Absolutely.
lovely. That's obviously we can't show you pictures. You'll have to go out and look at the book. But that's Everton bringing the cup home in 33. Sorry,
33, yeah.
and Dixie holding it aloft on a horse-drawn carriage through the streets of Liverpool. It's fantastic, fantastic.
Fantastic image, fantastic team, fantastic player. And while we're going back to the early days, only two teams that have played from the first FA Cup games to the modern FA Cup games, but both missed one season. I was aware of this fact. I thought it would have been the same season for the reason of a war or something like that, but it was two
Mm-hmm.
different seasons for both clubs. So you put a little bit of meat on the bone of that, if you would, please, Richard.
Yeah, well, the two clubs are Maidenhead,
Yeah.
now playing Maidenhead United, isn't it? Yeah,
Yes.
and Marlow,
Marlow.
not far away, who play step four of non-league in one of the first divisions of the Isthmian League. Both were in the first competition in 1871-72. Fantastic. They played each other, I think, on the opening day of FA Cup games, which is just brilliant fact, isn't it?
Yeah.
And both have only missed one competition. Maidenhead couldn't raise them to enter, and Marlow missed a year because the FA lost the envelope with their application. But other than that, which I think gives Marlow a marginal advantage, don't you?
I
And
do.
that's why I chose to use Marlow rather than, sorry to all the Maidenhead fans. But so both of them have played in every FA Cup competition but one, which is a real wow fact.
Birmingham City have not obviously played in that many games, years in the FA Cup, but Birmingham City didn't enter the competition one year. Again, I think it was lost by the Football Association.
I didn't know that. That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
I'm
Yeah.
almost certain that we didn't enter it the one year because of the same reason of Marlow. So the administration of the FA Cup, the secretaries sometimes led a little bit to be
But
desired.
maybe it was the postman, Gabbie.
Well, you got to blame it on Pat. I mean, the cat was
Maybe.
having a bad day. But yeah, absolutely. But Aston Villa, there's always the rib tickling in the Midlands. We've lost the FA Cup more times than you've won it, and you did, didn't
Yeah.
you? You lost the
Yeah.
FA Cup.
1895. Yeah, that story's told right at the start of the books.
Mm.
And do you want me to tell the story?
Why not?
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
Well, the Villa won the cup. They beat the Albion at the Crystal Palace, the first final at the Crystal Palace, and they gave it to put on display in his window to their kit supplier, a man called William Shilcock, who had a shop in Newtown Row. And one night, 3 guys got in. I think it was 3 guys, and stole it, and it was never seen again. And the theory goes that they took it away and melted it down, and had somebody in the jewellery quarter. They were a 4th man in the jewellery quarter who was going to give them money for it. Actually, he gave them far less than he told them he was going to give them. And this story took about 100 years to come. The revelation of who was responsible took about 100 years to come to light, and that was through some great work by a chap called Bernard Gallagher, a man who lots of your listeners will also know. Another chap who used to be Villa programme editor. In the Villa Club magazine in the mid 1990s, over a couple of months he ran the full story, and the thief was a man called Stosha State, who's was called Stosha because of his splendid moustache, and he's pictured in the book.
Sounds like a Peaky Blinder, doesn't he?
It does. He does. He looks like one too. and we're pretty sure that it was Stosha and his mates who stole the cup, and only got a few shillings for it in the end, so it wasn't worth it. But the Villa made money on it because they'd insured it, and they claimed the amount the Villa claimed on the insurers was far more than they were fined by the FA for losing it.
Wow.
So that was a good. Doug Ellis would have been proud of that bit of business.
Managers that have won the FA Cup. George Ramsey won it 6 times for the Villa, and Arsene Wenger won it. Sorry?
Can I stop you there, Gabbie? You've just tumbled headlong into one of the great FA Cup myths there, haven't you?
Right.
You've just done. You're a bit like, those old films where Norman Wisdom walks down the road whistling and falls down a manhole cover, which he doesn't see because he's looking at the world whistling. You've just done a Norman Wisdom there. George Ramsey was never Aston Villa's manager.
Right. Okay.
He had that title. He had the title secretary manager.
Yes.
And he ran and I've gone into this on the little piece about Arsene Wenger. Great stuff. Great picture of Arsene Wenger in 2017. And I've addressed this issue. George Ramsey was the secretary, and he had a secretary's duties. He was the manager in as much as he ran the club.
Yeah.
But the directors picked the team, and the trainer took training.
Right.
And the players worked out tactics amongst themselves.
Wow.
So in no way was he comparable to a modern manager.
Right.
And I'm afraid, this has been allowed to, since people started digging around when Arsene Wenger began to win the cup regularly, this has started to be sort of repeated, usually on the internet. If Dave Woodall is listening, the Villa fanzine editor,
good lad,
he is a good lad, and he'll be getting to his feet and applauding now, because this is I've quoted him in the book actually on this. This is one of his. This is one of the big things that he and I go on about. George Ramsey was never Villa's manager in the sense that manager is understood now.
Who was the trainer then who should take the applause?
Well, it would have been over the period of Villa's 6 wins. You put me on the spot there. Over the period of Villa's 6 wins, it would have been different people.
Yeah.
But the trainer just made sure they ran around the pitch.
Yeah,
really.
sure.
I mean, the players. I'll give you an example of how the players picked the team. Before the opening game in 1920, I don't know whether it was the first round in those days or the third round. I don't have that to hand, but Villa were playing QPR then in the Southern League in the first or the third round on the Saturday. They got a few problems up front, and a few players, senior players, went to see the directors and said, "You should give this young lad Billy Walker a go." We've noticed him, playing for the reserves, whatever. He's ready for the first team. So Billy Walker made his debut on the Saturday. I think he scored twice, and became perhaps still Villa's greatest ever player.
Yeah.
Now, but he only got his chance because the senior players went to the directors and said, "This lad's ready for the first team." So that gives you an indication that Ramsey was not the manager in the way that we understand manager these days.
We do know he was a captain in 1920, and that was Andy Ducat, wasn't it?
Yeah. What a man! Dual international.
Yeah.
Football, one Test match for England in 1921 against the Australians. He didn't do very well, but nevertheless, you can't take that away from him. He wasn't supposed to be Villa captain in that final. Jimmy Harrop was the captain.
Right.
And Harrop was injured a few weeks before, so Ducat took over. Cool, elegant, unhurried wing half, a magnificent sportsman, magnificent athlete, and a very, very good batsman in county cricket as well, scored many thousands of runs. So he achieved what I think is a double that no one else has done, and which will certainly never be done again, within a few weeks of within a few weeks he was a Wisden Cricketer of the Year, and he was an FA Cup final winning captain.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure that's never going to be repeated, Gabbie, don't you?
And he died at the crease as well, didn't he?
He did, at Lord's 1942, playing for Surrey Home Guard against Sussex Home Guard. They'd just come back after lunch. He was obviously well past it then, but he was in the Home Guard. He'd had a medical examination. I know this because, and I think you've talked about this, Jonathan Northall's got a biography of Andy coming out in a few weeks' time. He was batting just after lunch and he collapsed, and they think he died pretty much straight away, I think. And Andy, he'd had a medical a couple of days before, and the doctor had told him, "Oh, you'll go on for years." He was still trim, very fit, coaching school boys, doing a bit of journalism. So it was a terrible shock.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? But again, players, people look fit and seem fit and get the medical that they are fit, and then blimey drop down dead. It's just unbelievable.
Only a few years ago, so tragically, Ugo Ekiog, a player.
Absolutely.
A player I watched a lot in the 1990s. Must have absolutely looked as fit as a fiddle, mustn't he? But so sad that. Yeah. No, so that's Andy Ducat. Yeah. Wisden Cricketer of the Year, FA Cup final winning captain. That's never going to be done again.
I think you're right, and I think that's what I love about the history of football. There are situations and scenarios like that would never be replicated. The ball burst as well in 46, and was it 47 as well?
Yes, it did. Inferior post-war materials.
Absolutely, yeah.
It did, yeah. That probably. There's sometimes balls go a bit soft these days, don't they? And sometimes you see the players stop the game and hold them up to the ref, and although it doesn't happen. At the level of football I now watch at lower levels of non-league, it doesn't happen that the ball gets kicked over a hedge or whatever, or a fence, and you have to, and you use about 15 balls in the course of a game.
Yeah, they'll knock on the door. Mind you, they could do that at Kenilworth Road, couldn't they? Sandy Browne, 15 goals for the only non-league team to ever win the FA Cup. And I couldn't believe this when I learned of this many years ago. Tottenham non-league are having a laugh, ain't you? Southern League, they won the FA Cup.
They did. The Southern League was very strong, of course, and a lot of clubs that we know, QPR, West Ham, Crystal Palace, Reading, those clubs played in the Southern League. Yeah. What I think people don't realise is that how much in the early days of professional football, it was a Midland and Northern preserve.
Yes.
Until Woolwich Arsenal came along, there were no Football League clubs in the South. I think that's right. Answers on a postcard if I'm wrong. And so although the Southern League, obviously Tottenham's achievement was extraordinary, but the Southern League was very strong.
Yeah.
And some of those clubs could actually pay more because there was no maximum wage. So they could lure players down from, maybe someone who was dissatisfied at a Midland club or a Northern club. They could lure them down and actually find them a job, pay them for playing football, and the players would be better off.
Yeah.
So, yes, they were non-league. Yes, it's an amazing story, but they weren't quite as non-league as
Ailes Owen.
Yes, yeah, good example. Yeah. Good example.
The FA Cup being protected during the Second World War, that story's in the book. We're not going to talk about that because we want people to buy the book. So there's some fabulous stories in there. I mean, it is a treasure chest. 1981 was the 100th FA Cup final, wasn't it? Played between Manchester City and Tottenham Hotspurs.
It was, yeah. I mean, that's an anniversary. We don't. It was stated, I think, but you know, I remember 1962 Leeds Arsenal as being the semi-final with the parade beforehand. But I suppose that tells you that in 2032 we'll have the 150th final. So
Absolutely, yeah.
That was celebrated less, but luckily, you know, there were two great games, weren't they? Ricky Villa and, you know, a very good a drawn game on the Saturday, and then an absolute classic final.
Absolutely. And Steve Perryman, because the winning goal was one of the classic and greatest goals that we've seen to win a Wembley Cup final by Ricardo Villa, who come over to England with his little fella and pal Osvaldo Ardiles after the 78 World Cup finals. So he wore the number 5 shirt, but he didn't wear the number 5 shirt in the first game.
Cabbie, you've done me for trivia. That's fantastic. I didn't know that.
Steve Perryman did.
What I do know is this, and this is he was substituted in the first game, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
And he stormed off.
Yes, he did.
He was so, I think, this with his own performance, a bit of the Benito Carbones. He stormed off, and Perryman went to Keith Birkinshaw and said, "You should play because this is such a bad thing for team spirit and all that stuff, what have you." So that Perryman, he wouldn't have been playing if Steve Perryman had his way in the second game.
That's absolutely true, because Keith used to ask Steve his opinion. Lots of managers used to, of course, especially with the captains. And Steve would say, he'd ask me, but he wouldn't take me advice. Steve Perryman's advice when Keith asked him, would he play Ricky in the replay, was no, I fucking well wouldn't. He stormed off there. And Steve wouldn't have played him, but he did. And Steve returned to his usual number 6 shirt. And Ricky had the number 5 shirt. So Ricky Villa actually did score the winning goal in Steve Perryman's shirt, the number 5 shirt.
Well, that's something I didn't know. That's a fantastic bit of information.
Another lovely bit of information. Sorry?
I've been all this down for volume 2.
Absolutely. 1974, arguably the most controversial FA Cup tie of all time, involving Newcastle United and Nottingham Forest. You do cover it in the book as well.
Great
Lovely
picture.
story.
Yeah. Well, Newcastle, there was this tremendous, as there always is still in Newcastle, tremendous expectation. Sunderland had won it the previous year, which must have added to the pressure. They drew Forest, and Forest were a middling second division club, so they're expected to win. They're at home, they're expected to. And early on in the second half, they find themselves 3-1 down. Long-term Newcastle fans might recognise this scenario. I don't mean what followed, but the fact they were disappointing was a big day for them. And so there was a pitch invasion to try and stop the game, not because the fans wanted to punch up with the Forest fans. They streamed on from the Lees' end, which was then the Newcastle sort of Cop end, not the Gallagate as it is now. And they streamed on and they stopped the game. The players went off, but the players went off, but actually the police did a good job and got them off quite quickly, and the game resumed. So the attempt to have the match abandoned failed. But when the teams came out again, whether Forest were a bit spooked, Forest actually thought the ref was. Newcastle fought back and ended up winning 4-3. But Forest objected to the FA, and a rematch was ordered, which took place at Goodison. Forest were a bit perplexed by that. They thought it should have been at the City Ground, and they drew 0-0, I think.
Yes, they did.
And so there was another game, and even more. Surely that should have been the third game, but that was at Goodham as well. And Newcastle eventually won very narrowly. So that was extremely controversial. And but getting a match replayed, there's another spread in which you might have seen of something I was actually sort of involved with, which was when Burton Albion played Leicester in 1985.
Right.
And the Burton Albion goalkeeper Paul Evans was hit by, I think, a bit of wood. thrown from the Leicester end, knocked unconscious. It was 1-1 at the time, and he was very groggy, but he carried on. This was before we had sub goalkeepers on the bench.
Yeah.
He carried on, obviously in no fit state to continue. And Leicester won 6-1. Gary Lineker scored a hat-trick. And afterwards is a cracking story, really. The reason I was involved in this, you're probably scratching your head and thinking that I was then sports editor of the Burton Mail newspaper.
Right.
The second job of my career. And Burton had a promising young manager called Neil Warnock, who was involved in this. And so 6-1, they've lost with a groggy keeper. But there's absolutely no thought of injustice. It was just hooliganism that happened all the time those days, and you had to take it. Their big day had been spoiled, but they'd made a lot of money. Did I say this was at the baseball ground, by the way? I don't think I did.
No, you didn't, no.
Burton were drawn at home to the massive. You've got to remember this long before, or even dreamt of. So they switched the game to the baseball ground, obviously partly because their ground wasn't up to it, and partly because they saw they could make a lot more money. Yeah. They did make a lot of money. And immediately afterwards, there was no thought of getting the match replayed or objecting. They just thought, well, that's bad luck and all that. But a group of journalists from the Monday morning paper, searching for another angle, as Monday morning writers tend to do, sort of got their heads together and said, why don't we go and see the Burton chairman and try and get him outraged and ask for a rematch. So they did, and the Burton chairman, a chap called Bill Royal, sat and listened to them and thought, yeah, actually, we should ask for a rematch. And so they protested to the FA, and the FA agreed with them, and it was played behind closed doors, actually at Highfield Road. Right. It should have been back at the baseball ground, but it was a particularly cold snap of weather then, so they ended up playing at Highfield Road behind closed doors.
What was the score?
1-0 to Leicester. But the upshot of it was, Gabbie, was that Gary Lineker never scored an FA Cup hat-trick.
And Dennis Law never scored a double hat-trick.
No, he didn't. No, well, that's a very similar case. So poor old Gary, this is really why it makes the book. Gary Lineker can't claim to have got an FA Cup hat-trick, even though he did actually score one.
Going back to the Forest game, do you know what the spark was for the pitch invasion?
Well, Forest had just gone 3-1 up. Do you think there was something else?
Oh, there was 100%. What had happened, Duncan McKenzie ran into one of the Newcastle defenders. Well, this was Pat Howard's account of what went on. So he went to the referee, he said, ref, that was never a penalty. So the referee says, I'm giving it. And he says, if you give that end a penalty, he said, look, if you don't shut up, I'll send you off. And Pat said, if you send me off, there'll be a riot here. So he said, if you don't shut up, I'm sending you off. And anyhow, Pat was still remonstrating, and he sent Pat off. Sure enough, what happened? Pat Howard got sent off, and there was a riot. They all come onto the pitch. Bobby Moncur scored the winning goal in the dying minutes.
I knew that Pat Howard had been sent off, and that's mentioned.
And that's what happened.
This is more scribbling for the second edition.
And also, as well, in 1972, one of the greatest goals ever, and John Motson's debut, the ball whistled past Pat, or just above Pat's head. And he thought, because I've done a few podcasts with Pat, and I wished him happy anniversary. And he said, what for, Gabbie? I said, Hereford United versus Newcastle, Pat. Thanks for that. He said, as he whistled past me, he said, I thought that's got half a chance of hitting the back of the net. What a goal.
Tremendous. Yeah, that's got everything, that game, hasn't it? That, the classic goal, the pitch, the kids running on in their parkers, it's just absolutely classic. And Newcastle fans, but there you are, Newcastle the fall guys again. That, and as you say, made John Motson's career unbelievable, really. It was 50 years ago the other week, wasn't it? Happy Ronnie Radford Day. I remember wishing people.
Feel sorry for Ricky George.
A little bit, yeah. You watch that again, you're not quite sure how that shot goes in, are you? That Ricky George shot.
I know,
You're pretty certain how the Ronnie Radford shot goes in, but Ricky George's didn't seem to hit it at all. But I think it was just placement and probably flat-footed goalkeeper. And on came the kids in the Parkers again, didn't they?
Absolutely. 1972, the final, the centenary final. What a wonderful goal by Alan Clark, who had his fingers trod on by Peter Simpson earlier in that move, you know.
Did he? Deliberately?
Yeah, probably.
Yes, I would have thought so.
Probably.
Knowing that Arsenal team, wouldn't be at all surprised. Great header, wasn't it?
He was going to volley it.
Really? Is that what he
Yeah,
said?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
He was going to volley it, but as the ball come over, it dipped, and he thought, "I'm going to dive and head this," and he dived and head it, and it went into the back of the net. Mick
A
Jones, of
classic,
course,
a
done his.
classic David Coleman 1-0, wasn't it? Yeah.
What a great commentator he was. I mean, let's talk about commentators for a bit, because they made the game as well, didn't they? You know, we had great commentators, I think, in those days. These days, I don't know. They just seem to be, let's say, different. But back in the day, we were blessed with great commentary.
I think the BBC have still got some good ones.
Okay.
I don't watch it, and I think Sky have too. I
Yeah.
think obviously the analysis and the co-commentator, that's all gone to a new level, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Since, again, I think, well, I'm not accusing you of over romanticising Gabbie, but I think that's not. I don't know really. There were some guys. I think Kenneth Wolstenholme was terribly overrated, though. Sorry, I know that's.
Okay.
I know there's a bolt of lightning going to strike me down now, but I do think Kenneth Wolstenholme, though he did utter the greatest commentary line of all time in any sport, so maybe we should forgive him everything else. But do you remember he made a comeback in the 70s doing football in the Northeast?
No, I mean in the 70s on ITV it was Hugh Johns
Yes.
for us.
Yeah, in the Midlands,
In the
but in the
Midlands, yeah.
Northeast for a few seasons it was Kenneth Wolstenholme,
Yeah.
and he just didn't speak for minutes on end. You know,
Right.
it would. So I don't know. I always think Kenneth Wolstenholme was.
Kenneth? Where's Kenneth? He's dropped off to sleep.
Yeah, yeah.
I wonder what Kenneth or the COCOM would have thought about the Leatherhead lip.
Oh, yeah, I can't tell you who commented on that, but anyone who wants to YouTube it will find it in a second. Chris Kelly, yeah. He should have put them 3-0 up. He just missed that. That's the picture in the book from.
Yeah. Fine margin.
Fine margins, yeah. He went round the keeper. He just delayed a second too long and was cleared off the line. Yeah, what a story that would have been. Leatherhead.
Would it? Oh, absolutely. Amateurs, and they gave him a right good game, didn't they, Leicester City?
Yeah, well, they were. Kelly had scored a very good goal. So it was John Motson. John Motson came up with a great line. He said, "So it wasn't all talk. Kelly had been talking himself up in the build to the game, and he missed this chance to 3-0. Surely Leicester would come back from 3-0. And interestingly, they were in the Isthmian League in those days. They were still amateur. Maybe some of them got a bit of money in the boot, but they weren't semi-pros. Quite an interesting. I thought when I came across that while doing my research, it was quite an interesting. That was right at the end of the amateur.
I love the story of 1973. I mean, what a great double save by Jim Montgomery, by the way. But it was after the FA Cup final when Queen's Park Rangers went to Roker Park and one Stanley Bowles smashed the FA Cup off the plinth.
Did he?
Yeah,
he did, been on a job for that, so
yeah. No, he did. Yeah, him and Don Shanks, they were having a bet. They always did. But Stan was he had a bet that he could knock the FA Cup on off the plinth because he would have a bet on everything. Stan Bowles, and again, Stan was good for a bet. I mean, that left foot of his was like a wand, and he knocked the FA Cup off its plinth.
Good for Stan, yeah, good for Stan. Can't argue with that. If he could pass a betting shot like he could pass a ball,
absolutely.
Was that Ernie Tagg, his manager?
It certainly was, Ernie. Yes, I mean that's been levelled at many a player, but you're absolutely right. It was Ernie's line to Stan Bowles. Talking about players talking themselves up in 1974. We had a situation where it was levelled that Malcolm McDonald was telling the Liverpool players what he was going to do at Wembley, and they walked out in a purple tracksuit, didn't they? Tops, not bottoms.
Yes, that's a good fact. Again, you've dredged up another good one there. I'd forgotten that one. Yeah. That was poor old Malcolm McDonald, he never quite sparkled in the cup final, did he? There was that joke about what gets taken to Wembley every year and not used,
Yeah.
and the answer is, of course, the ribbons of the runners-up. But somebody said, "Oh, it's Malcolm McDonald," but he wasn't the only big player to how many cup finals did John Barnes play in? John Barnes never graced that stage despite having 2 or 3 opportunities to do so. And a story in the book of Tom Finney, Tom Finney in '54 against Albion. That's in the book, and this was again scripted to be Finney's year, a year after Matthews, and he had a very poor game, and Albion won, and poor old Tom never got one of the possibly the greatest English footballer of all time, never got the chance to win the FA Cup.
Another great footballer, an Irish lad, George Best, never played in the cup final. Wasn't bad. And Johnny Haynes never won the FA Cup. I think Johnny ever played in the final as well. Two greats not to play in the FA Cup final.
That's a very good one, Gabbie. Yeah, Johnny Haynes. Yeah. There's a good story in the book about George Best, and George Best loved the FA Cup, and he was taken just after he'd signed for United as an apprentice. He was taken to the '63 final, and just absolutely fell in love with Wembley and the occasion and the romance and everything like that, and just loved the whole thing and dreamt of getting there. And of course, United lost a string of semi-finals during his career, and he never made it, and that was a cause of great sadness to him.
Because the football world wanted Chelsea versus Manchester United, didn't they?
Yes.
That was the blue ribbon. That was Chelsea from the south against Manchester United, the FA Cup final, the first FA Cup final, 1970.
Yeah,
of course.
Leeds took 3 games to get past United, and Best missed a chance in the second replay. No, the first replay at Villa Park. I won't regale, in case you've got any young listeners, I won't regale them with the story of what he'd been doing that afternoon. But he had a poor game and missed a chance. And as I say, they replayed 2 nights later at Bolton, and Leeds won 1-0, I think. And he never got the chance. Shame, isn't it? Great shame.
I think you're absolutely right. George did score off the pitch as well as on the pitch. What a player, one of the greatest ever. And I think one of the only people that wanted Leeds United to play in that final was Alan Hudson. And sadly, Huddy missed that final when he went down a little hole at the Hawthorns on Easter Monday in 1970. It was.
He missed it through injury, which was I remember reading while writing the book, I was reading the previews of the final, and it was thought that his absence would be, critical to Chelsea. Really, it wasn't in the end, although they came very close to losing that first game at Wembley, didn't they?
Absolutely, and Osgood scoring in every round, as did Jeff Astle. And players don't score in every round these days. They don't play in every round, I guess.
No, that's right. I mean, I don't know what the recent statistics are on that, but you're probably right that at some point they get rested, or they get substituted after an hour, which didn't used to happen, did it? You didn't take off but players scoring every round. Yeah. Jeff Astle, Stan Mortensen in '53. They were, special players, as you've said, Gabbie. Special players.
And I suppose really we've got to feel a little bit sorry for Stan Mortensen in the Matthews final.
It's
incredible, isn't it, really?
He scored a hat-trick and they didn't even... Stanley Matthews said that himself. I wasn't the man of the match, at all. So, to be fair, Stanley Matthews did acknowledge that. In 2003, on the anniversary, to mark the anniversary just before the cup final, I was working at the Times then, and I got Opta, the modern day analyst, to watch the '53 cup final and come up with their stats based on the game.
Right.
And Stan Mortensen was, by Opta's standards, by Opta's measurements, Stan Mortensen was the man of the match by a mile. And I think Stanley Matthews was only 5th or something like that. 4th or 5th. He wasn't that high, which is a staggering thing, really.
And the 1970 final, there was that myth that the pitch was so bad because the Horse of the Year uh, show was on there that
Yeah,
cut it all up.
show jumping had been staged there, but not immediately before the final, as is commonly. I mean, the pitch, that's partly the reason the pitch was in such a bad state, but, there were lots of other reasons as well. I recommend people to a book called All Crazy Now by David Tossell on football in the 70s, and that he explains that in great detail, and that myth has arisen about the Horse of the Year show. Show jumping on the pitch was part of the reason, but it wasn't the only reason, and it hadn't been that recently. So.
Absolutely, it's one of David loves to tell that story because you say to David, Dave, do you know why the pitch was so bad? They had the Horse of the Year. No, they never.
No, you
Yeah,
might hear an explosion. Yeah, at the
a-
other end of the.
absolutely. Albion beating Birmingham City in 1931.
That
I've
might
been
be my
very,
favourite.
yes,
That
I
might be my
thought it
favourite
might be.
in the whole book. No, nothing to do with Blues losing the final. That the picture of the Albion players,
Yeah,
Paddington Station, Monday afternoon, just about to go back with the cup, climbing all over the locomotive. I mean, you know the picture I mean, Gabbie.
yeah,
That's a fantastic picture, isn't it?
yeah, it
Just
is.
absolutely fantastic. Just they didn't worry much about health and safety, did they?
No, they didn't because it wasn't, we didn't realise things in them days. We just got on with it. There was no health and safety. But I've been very close to that boot. I did an interview with Jeremy Peace years ago and he says, Gabbie, let me show you the boot that scored the winning goal against Birmingham City. It was in the boardroom at the Hawthorns. I'm guessing it still is. I said, thanks for that, Jeremy. I really appreciate it. Icon's a lovely chapter. The club that shook football, Blackburn Olympic, in a team group believed to have been taken around May 1882. What a great photograph that is, isn't it?
It's a great photo. Yeah. You wouldn't want to come across them on a dark night, would you?
Again, they look like Peaky Blinders, don't they?
Blackburn Olympic, for people who don't know the story, they won the cup in 1883, and they were the first northern professionals to win the cup. They only had 2 or 3 professionals, but previously, between 1872 and that year, the cup was the preserve of southern teams made up of former public school boys. We know the names: Wanderers, Royal
Yeah,
Engineers, Old Etonians. We know all those names.
yeah.
Clapham Rovers. They contested the finals, and then the cup gradually grew, and this was Blackburn Olympic winning the cup was one of the absolutely key moments in the history of football, because from that moment, paying players to play became a huge thing, and professionalism, which wasn't legalised for some years, but it was from that day it was inevitable. So Blackburn Olympic, although they quickly disappeared, they crashed and burned within a very few years. They are absolute the team that shook football, as you rightly say, Gabbie.
1911, Bradford lift their own trophy, and
Yeah,
the
story.
urn weighs 175 ounces and is 19 inches high, exclusive of the plinth. The body has a series of bold flutings surmounted by 4 panels decorated with rich bunches of grapes and vine leaves. I didn't realise that.
No, that's a description by Geoffrey Green, distinguished Times football correspondent, in his 1949 book about the Cup,
Yeah.
which is a terrific book. And those aren't my words for anybody who thinks that. So the FA decided they needed a new trophy around 1910, and they put it out to tender. And it was the competition to design the new one and manufacture the new one was won by a Bradford company, Fatteronis, who, if you look them up, fascinating history. The company, they're still going, still making trophies and medals, which is brilliant, isn't it? And they came up with the design that we know now. And lo and behold, in the first year of the new trophy, made in Bradford, designed in Bradford, who should win it? Bradford City.
Fantastic.
Just I mean, the FA Cup, you can't beat it for stories, can you? And that's one of the best. Radford never won it since, but they won it in the first year of the new trophy. So yeah, that's a great story.
And Bury have won the FA Cup as well. Sadly, no longer with us, but Bury a team that have won the FA Cup.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, with a 6-0 win
Yeah,
against Derby County, which was a record that Manchester City equalled, didn't they, against Watford? Yeah, Bury. Lots of clubs who perhaps younger readers wouldn't associate with cup glory, but that's. I mean, I'm going right back to your opening remarks here, Gabbie. That was the thing. There was this romance about it. It
yeah.
wasn't necessarily won by one of the top four. It could be won by a team halfway down the league. Sometimes it was won by a team from the second tier. You mentioned Sunderland not long ago, didn't you? So, and West Brom indeed in 31 were in the second tier. So didn't happen very often, but it really was open to everybody. And Villa won it in 57 from a very average league position. That was part of the appeal. Really, it wasn't just the preserve of a few. And thank goodness for Leicester last season, who, brought a little bit of romance back. Even Leicester were in the top 5 in the Premier League, weren't they, at the time?
Absolutely. Last team to win it without any internationals. Would that be West Ham in 1980 against Arsenal? Trevor Brookings stooping header.
Very famous final. They had Trevor would have been an international by then,
Yes,
wouldn't
of
he?
course he would have. Yeah. Yeah, no, he would have, yeah.
You're
Yeah,
going to
of
send me
course.
deep into the record books to find that. That wouldn't happen now, would it? That's impossible,
No.
surely.
But they were second. I think he probably was the only international, wasn't he, in that West Ham team? They were second division, though, wasn't they, when they
They
won it?
were,
Yeah,
they were. And we had a run of them then, didn't we? Southampton, we've already
yeah,
talked
yeah,
about.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
Fulham got to the final as well, didn't they, in
yeah, I
'75?
remember that well.
We had a little run of them then. There haven't been so many of late, have there? Portsmouth. Oh, about Portsmouth beat Cardiff, didn't they, in 2008? Cardiff were not in the top flight, but
Absolutely. Who was the smallest captain to lift the FA Cup? Was that Billy Kerr of Sunderland?
well, if you want to wait while I come upstairs with armfuls of Rothman's football yearbooks, if you've got a couple of hours, he'd be close, wouldn't he?
He would be, yeah.
Billy Bremner, year before.
Yeah.
Look those two up, they'd be close, wouldn't they?
Um,
But then, Gabbie, that you've just raised something interesting there. Of course, back in the day, players, because of diet and things, were not as tall as they are now.
correct. Yeah.
Now, I'm gonna give you a bit of trivia that even you don't know. This one, in the 1913 final between Villa and Sunderland,
Yeah.
only one of the 22 players was over 6 foot.
Blimey.
And
Who was that?
Charles Buchan,
Wow.
who later founded a rather famous magazine.
Didn't he just? Scored a
Yeah,
lot of goals and all.
yeah, he did. Charles Buchan was the only one of the 22 who was over 6 foot.
Wow.
So it's possible, I suppose. Ernest Needham, first picture in the book, 1899. Ernest Needham, he was quite short. There you go. I'm just throwing them at you. You're going to have to go away and smallest FA Cup final winning captain. That's fantastic. That'd be a fantastic list.
Them two birds look decent. Luton Town versus Nottingham Forest. A lot of badges and rattles and rosettes. They were a staple, wasn't they, of FA Cup finals, and they got a few balloons there as well.
People would get dressed up for cup, not just the final, but for cup ties in general. I think that's in the chapter about fans. I do go into this a bit. Travelling away support was not very common until we started to get motorways in the 60s.
Yeah.
But for cup ties, people would travel. So you got away support at cup ties in a way you didn't at league game, and that's another thing that made them, a bit more special.
Have you got any favourite story that you've told in this book? Because as we've said from the beginning, it isn't in chronological order. It's
No,
really random.
I didn't take you up on that, Gabbie, and it was kind of you to bring that up because, this is not for anyone thinking I might buy that. This is not a chronological year-by-year history of the FA Cup. You will find some years are not in there. What it is a collection of fantastic images and fantastic stories from the FA Cup. And all the obvious bases are, 53, 63, 73, apologies, 23, or, the classic matches are covered, but it's not the sort of, it's not a linear history of the Cup. And I think it's all the better for that, actually, but I would say that, wouldn't I? And as you said, they are grouped under themes. So, you might get two pictures from 1964 from or whatever. You asked me for a favourite story.
Yeah.
I'm looking through now. I rather like I quite like the Khaki Cup final 1915. A match
Do you know what?
Soldiers.
My focus as I'm looking at the book now is on page 124, 125, 1915, the Khaki Cup final.
Perhaps it just falls open at that.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, the football carried on after the outbreak of the First World War for a season or two. It wasn't actually very much approved of by the authorities. It got a lot of criticism. By the time we got to the cup final of 1915, it was clear that it had got to stop.
Yeah.
And so this match was played at Old Trafford, Sheffield United v Chelsea. A very, hardly any travelling fans because there were no trains or fewer trains, and they couldn't be used for frivolous purposes. Played on a very dank Manchester day. A crowd made up mainly of soldiers, so the khaki there were no bright colours around. Some of them, as the picture shows, some of them were wounded. Some of the newspapers, the Times in particular, didn't cover it because they thought the whole thing was terribly distasteful. And so it's hard to say. You asked me for a favourite story. It's too sombre to be a favourite story, but it is a good one. And it illustrates, I suppose, what I've tried to do throughout the book is show the Cup's place in the history of the country as well, and in the sort of social fabric of the country. And I think that story particularly does that job, really.
Have you any favourite year of the FA Cup? I'm looking at a lovely picture in 1969 when Alan Clark, he'd scored the goal that took Leicester City to the final against his team that he supported.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, good point.
Do you know his dad played for Wolverhampton? His grandfather played for Wolverhampton Wanderers.
Did he? I mean, it's a famous footballing family, of course, with all his brothers. I mean, my favourite year, you ask anybody of my generation, and I think you will say the same, there's a magic about 73, isn't there? About Sunderland winning in 73.
Porterfield, yeah.
I feature that. Porterfield, as David Coleman again said. I feature that story in different points of the book, I think 3 times, and it was just such an upset. Leeds were I know Leeds often lost finals, but they were such favourites. Sunderland again, they're only halfway up the second division, weren't they? They weren't even top of the second division. Just and they played so well. And, what was I, 12, 13? That was just magical, really. If you wanted 90 minutes to encapsulate what the Cup's all about, then that's the 90 minutes you'd take, surely.
And also one of the giant killings that we'd have to look at was Colchester against Leeds United.
That's the story, isn't it? Colchester beating Leeds,
That has to be the greatest giant killing of the FA Cup, in my opinion, because Leeds were that great.
Yeah, they were, and the only 2 cup ties they lost either side of that were finals. They lost in the final, apart from that, they only lost in finals for about a period of 3 seasons, I think. That's a great story, isn't it? Ray Crawford. Again, it was on the telly, wasn't it? David Coleman, I think. which obviously adds to the mystique. I don't think you can have a great upset unless most of the country's seen it. And because Leeds were so disliked, weren't they? That was another thing. That was another factor in it. Everybody loved to see them. Not everybody. Lots of people loved to see them taken down a peg or two. So
They never had the greatest PR machine, did they? To be fair, Leeds, although
they
in the
worked hard on
70s, sorry,
they worked hard on that though, didn't they? With the sock tags and the wave
I
into the
was
crowd.
just gonna bring that up.
They worked hard on their PR, and I think Reevy was conscious of that. But no, somehow
Do you know it was nothing to do with Don?
the sock tags, they were Paul Trevelyan's idea.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
he'd come back from America, and he went to Bill Nicholson. And he said to Bill, "Look, I want to bring the sock tags. I want to bring the balls. I want to bring the training before the game, booting the balls out onto the fans and sock tags." And Bill Nicholson said, "We're Tottenham. We don't do things like that at Tottenham. Go and have a
yeah.
word with Don Reevy." And he did, and it was Reevy. He said, "Will you have a word with Jack Charlton? If he passes Jack, then we'll do it." And the rest is
Did he
history.
really?
Yeah, he did. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
wonderful story. I've done a lovely little podcast with Paul. It took me 37 minutes to get a word in, but he's absolutely
Yes, I was going to say,
fabulous.
Paul did some work for me at the Times in the early 2000s, and you're absolutely right. It would have taken you, yeah. If you got one in after 37 minutes, you did well.
But he tells the story, and he tells the story wonderfully of how in the Sunday People, Don and Jack Charlton concocted a plan for Freddie Goodwin, the Birmingham City manager, to get suckered into it, drop Gordon Taylor, and therefore Leeds had the advantage and they would beat Birmingham City at Hillsborough. And when Paul Trevelyan turned up at Hillsborough, Don said, "They've dropped Taylor. Well done, Beaver. Leeds are one up." And Leeds went
Oh,
on and won 3-0.
yeah.
You wouldn't get that today.
No. What a fantastic story that is. Didn't know that.
Mm.
Didn't know. Fabulous story.
So
Fabulous.
the book, buy it. It's out now from Amazon. We have to give a shout out to the publishers, Pitch Publishing, who
Yeah, done a
published
great.
some fantastic football books.
They've done a terrific job with it, and they've been an absolutely they're fine people to work with. So they've been great to work with. And as I say, just to mention Duncan Olner, the designer, again, because it wouldn't be the lovely thing it is without Duncan's magic. So
And I think there's always a magic story to finish on, and our time is up. And in 1933, numbers are up for City. Lovely story to go out on. A wonderful picture there. Manchester City players meet the Duke of York.
yeah, this is. I mean, it's hard to imagine, isn't it, that there was a time when players didn't have numbers on their backs. It must have
Yeah.
been incredibly hard to work out who was who. But yeah, in 1933, the FA decided to experiment with numbers, and they were numbered 1 to 22. With I think Everton took one. That's right, Everton v Man City. Everton took 1 to 11, and then the City goalkeeper was 12.
Yeah.
Not the goalkeeper. Sorry, that's wrong. The goalkeeper would have been 22. I'm looking at the picture now.
The
And
Everton goalkeeper Ted Sager wore number 1, but number 12 was City left winger Eric Brook.
yeah, Eric Brooks on the photo, and meeting the Duke of York,
Absolutely.
who stood in for the King because at the last minute, because it was a bit chilly, and the the palace, the King had been ill recently, and they didn't want to risk him on a chilly, damp day. So yeah, first time wore numbers, and there was, like most innovations, Gabbie, there was a bit of opposition to it. People thought it was somehow cheapened the game. But after that, everybody saw the advantages of it, really. Although it took a while for them to be introduced fully. But again, you can't imagine watching a game with no numbers, can you?
You can't, and finally, you can't imagine watching a game without the advertisements on the shirts. and Derek Dougan was the first. I don't think it was an FA Cup game, but it was Kettering Tyres, wasn't it? And
Yeah. Yes, I mean, occasionally, and this happened to the Villa in the mid-90s, and I think it happened to West Ham for a season, or maybe not a full season. They don't get a sponsorship deal. Villa didn't at the start of the season in 93, 94. So they come out without any sponsors on. And your first thought is, God, those shirts look so much better
yes,
without a sponsor's name on, don't they? You know, it just wouldn't it really? You know, is it really worth so much money that you couldn't do it? I don't know. Maybe that is overly romantic. But
it certainly is romantic. And the first FA Cup final was on the 16th of March 1872, Royal Engineers versus the Wanderers. And the latest, the 150th FA Cup final, isn't going to involve either of them, but it could involve Manchester City, Liverpool, Crystal Palace, or Chelsea.
I'm no great fan of Palace, but it'd be nice to see them get through just to break the hegemony of the super clubs, the modern super clubs, wouldn't it? It'd be very nice if that could happen.
And it would be lovely to go back to tradition where some of the smaller clubs, hence Bury, hence Bradford, etc., got to the FA Cup final and won it. So if I'm a betting man, I might put a few quid on Crystal Palace, especially given that Crystal Palace was one of the venues for the FA Cup final as well. So as the numbers are up for City, the numbers might be aligned and the stars aligned for Crystal Palace this year.
That would be a nice bit of romance, wasn't it? When it wasn't where that club played.
No, it wasn't.
Palace,
yes.
The final, but nevertheless, that would be a lovely link, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Can I thank you, sir, for your time? It's been an absolute pleasure. It's a fantastic book, The Cup, a pictorial celebration. But guys, it isn't just pictorial. It's words, it's stories as well of the world's greatest football tournament, which is 150 years old this year, by Richard Whitehead. Pitch Publishing have published it. It is a fantastic must-read, must-purchase book that would look fantastic on anybody's coffee table, because it is, Richard, a work of art, and I'm proud to have it in my possession and in my library, where it will take pride of place.
Gabbie, thank you very much indeed. It's really been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, sir, and thanks for listening, guys. Ta-ra,